The country was in many ways morally adrift and intellectually adrift. A new culture was going to have to grow up here and go its own way. It could look wistfully towards the old world, but it would never be part of it again.
Between the arrival of the Puritans in 1620 and the late 1700s, the world had changed. God-centered thought had slowly moved to man-centered thought. People looked to reason to explain the world, and writers like John Locke had planted the idea that people could govern themselves.
It's important to understand that one of the major contributions of the Enlightenment was to make people understand they could control their destiny. There was an understanding that human psychology could be contained and could be driven toward the control of one's destiny.
The shift to Enlightenment thinking and the growth of the newspaper industry made Americans receptive to the power of the moral essay. 2 months after its publication, Thomas Paine's Common Sense was familiar to almost every American. But the person who best symbolized the spirit of enlightenment in America was Benjamin Franklin. His persuasive writings helped to shape the concept of the ideal American.
I think Franklin actually is the foundational myth of America. If you take American culture as British American culture at the time of the new United States, Franklin's conception of himself that if one were sufficiently trained and self-confident, if one were willing to labor with one's hands and one's mind, one could have what has come today to be called the American dream.
There was a belief that somehow, by just freeing up your mind, looking at the world around you, finding your way into authorities who themselves were both energetic and humble and unbounded by ideology, you could figure out practically anything. And Franklin practically did that.
Benjamin Franklin was born in Boston in 1706, the youngest of 11 children. He apprenticed as a printer to his brother for 5 years. At 17, Franklin ran away to start a new life in Philadelphia.
I knew no soul nor where to look for lodging. I was fatigued with traveling, rowing, and want of rest. I was very hungry, and my whole stock of cash consisted of a Dutch dollar and about a shilling of copper.
He was what was called then a leather apron man. That is, he had joined a working man's association that in his day represented working people. And he's very proud of that in terms of his own identity. And I think that's very important in terms of American culture.
Franklin rejected the Puritan belief in original sin. He believed man began life as a blank slate and that he could shape his own destiny. Through cleverness and hard work, Franklin improved himself from the poor son of a candlemaker to a successful businessman, scientist, and writer.
Benjamin Franklin was a diplomat par excellence. He was a scientist. He was a philosopher. Franklin was an interesting fellow because he seemed to have had his finger in any number of schemes at self-improvement or national self-improvement.
When Franklin sat down at age 65 to write his autobiography, he presented himself as a role model for the self-made man. He believed that the individual could strive for improvement for the sake of bettering the community.
I took care not only to be in reality industrious and frugal, but to avoid all appearances of the contrary. I dressed plainly, I was seen at no places of idle diversion, I never went out a fishing or shooting. A book, indeed, sometimes debauched me from my work, but that was seldom, snug, and gave no scandal.
When he starts out life in Philadelphia as a young man, all bets are off, all values are open to question, everything needs to be invented from the start. The question which hangs in the air is, how will he become a citizen of Philadelphia? How will he help this town become a place apart, a place that's distinct? That's an eerily American moment.
Benjamin Franklin was a deist. He believed in a creator, but gave little thought to anything that couldn't be proved. Colonial writers like Cabeza de Vaca and Mary Rowlandson interpreted their experience through the Bible, where Franklin used his own life to examine human conduct.
His 13 virtues are fascinating for sides of Franklin that we might not really think about.
1. Temperance. Eat not to dullness, drink not to elevation. 2. Silence. Speak not but what may benefit others.
These virtues, well deployed, will bring you success in America.
Justice. Wrong none by doing injuries or omitting the benefits that are your duty. 9. Moderation. Avoid extremes. Forbear resenting injuries so much as you think they deserve.
This is, in fact, a good model for what they thought of as the rising generation. The generation that many of which was sort of growing up not rootless, but without the same powerful religious conviction that previous generations had had. What they recognized in Franklin was somebody who outgrew Puritanism, but comes back quickly, by his own account, to a belief in the necessity of virtue in the world.
Chastity. Rarely use venery, but for health or offspring. Well, what else are you going to use it for? Never to dullness, weakness, or the injury of your own or another's peace or reputation. In other words, if you're going to go on a tear, keep it quiet, be discreet. Not thou shalt not sin, but do it quietly. Go to Las Vegas and try to leave no tracks behind you.
But where he undercuts this list of virtue is 13 with humility. And there's one line that follows. Imitate Jesus and Socrates. How seriously are we supposed to take that? It's just like this little wink, wink, nudge, nudge. You just can't be completely serious. You know, he's straight-faced, but you can see the corner of his mouth twitching. Imitate Jesus and Socrates.
Close examination of Franklin's work revealed nuances and clever depths not seen on the first reading.
But what I love about Franklin is that he puts it in. So he can make fun of himself, that sort of drive for self-improvement, but he can also make fun of it by including it.
There's a wonderful passage where he's teaching the quality of modest diffidence, and you know, when students analyze that passage, they suddenly realize he's actually being fairly arrogant, but it's this wonderful manipulation of audience to see a certain thing. It's a kind of smoke and mirrors game, and he basically tells readers that that's what he's doing. That's what makes him such an icon in American political and economic history.
Sort of like being a good American by numbers in the Protestant society, the Protestant white male society that was America in the early national.